about you, but the first time I ever picked up an electric guitar, the first thing I did was I went, I just wanted to bend that string so bad, because when you're playing an acoustic, man, it fights you every step of the way. And I think I was in a music store, I can remember this. I was in a music store and there was a Telecaster, not this one, but another one sitting there. I picked it up and bent that string. Man, that's the sound right there. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just knew that I liked that effect, you know. It's so guitar, and it's so expressive, you know. So let's talk about string bending. I would imagine if you've been playing the guitar, you know, like I was, you know, for more than 10 minutes, you've probably already been bending strings. So we're just going to talk about kind of refining your technique and how to incorporate the technique into a blues style and of course use it within the context of the 12 bar. So what about bending technique? Well, there's two ways to bend the third string, for starters, that we're in the... I can bend it by pushing it toward the ceiling, or I can bend it by pulling it down toward the floor. Now the choice is really a matter of context. How does that help me get into the note and out of the note? In and of itself, they're the same, but it'll make a difference depending on how you incorporate it into a phrase. So we'll look at it and see how that works in context. But in both cases, I'm using supportive fingering. In other words, I'm using 3 fingers on the string, and when I bend the pitch up, we're talking about a whole step bend here. Now we've done the half step, or actually I shouldn't say the half step, the quarter tone. There's no real difference in the technique. It's a matter of degrees. You just push it further. But when I bend the whole step, I'm not just bending sort of like wherever. I'm bending to match a pitch. So the first step in learning to bend accurately is to know, where are you bending to? What's your destination? If I'm going to bend from the 4th note of the scale to the 5th, which is probably the most common whole step bend, then what I do is I play the 4th, I play the 5th, and then I use all 3 fingers behind that note on the 4th, the 4th degree there on the 3rd string. And I push that note up until I think I've matched it. Then I check it. And I want to hit that note spot on. It's irritating when you hear somebody go. It's like, no, that's just out of tune, you know. Now, bending to a blue note is not out of tune. That's deliberate. Bending a whole step, that's deliberate. But that's not deliberate, that's just sloppy, right? So have your pitch distinctly in mind. So from the 4th degree to the 5th degree, a whole step bend. I can pull it down. Just have to be careful. Now in both cases, you notice that my thumb is hanging over the top of the neck, and as a rule, that's where the thumb lies in blues technique. What that does also is anchor my hand. It gives me a fulcrum against which to bend that note. So it's difficult to bend accurately when your thumb is behind the neck. Now, I'm not saying you can't, I'm just saying it's more difficult than having your thumb over. So I'm going to use my thumb over the top all the time when I bend. So from the 4th to the 5th. The next one, very common bend, from the 7th to the 8th. Now, depending on your string gauge, that can be a tough one. I've got 11s on here. My second string, I think, is a 13. I don't know. I should look at the package. It's not a particularly stiff string, but in the context of the other strings, it has a little resistance to it, which I like personally. But I have to really push that note up there. It takes some strength. I have to have all 3 fingers there. Now, talk about your calluses. You've been playing for a while now. We've been going through a bunch of lessons here. If your calluses have not built up, this is when they're going to get built up, and there will be some pain involved, no doubt. You know, I've got grooves in my fingers just from doing what we just did here, but fortunately my calluses are there to help cushion it. So just consider that to be a fact of life. But I finger the string normally as if I'm just fingering it in a passage. But I push it up. Now, here's another very important part of string bending. When I push that note up toward the ceiling, what happens to the next string over, the third string? Well, I'm actually pushing it to the side, out of the way. And there's a slight gap under my finger between the third string and the second string. So as I push, I don't gather the two strings together so that they're like that. That gives me a sound I don't want to hear. So I put my finger down, I sort of rock my finger as I push the string up, maintain that little gap there so that I don't hear the third string as part of the bend. And at the same time, in my picking hand, I keep the heel of my hand down so that I mute the strings as I release. And I don't hear any extra noise coming from open strings or any notes other than the note that I'm actually bending. So I find my pitch, I put all three fingers on the note, I bend carefully to be sure that I don't capture an extra note or an extra string under my finger. I mute with the right hand. And that's the essence of string bending. And using it in context is just doing that exact thing more quickly. Now the other common string bend that you find, there's the 4th to the 5th, the 7th to the octave, there's the 3rd to the 4th. Right? Again, you check your pitch, bending from the 8th fret here up to the 10th fret. That's a tricky note, right? It takes a lot of strength to bend that note right up to pitch. Right? Now, it's common when you bend that you don't necessarily bend every note exactly the same all the time. In other words, right? Now that sounds like a whole step bend, but it really wasn't. That was a blue note. Because I followed the 7th with the octave, the combination sounded like very similar to a whole step bend. But if I do a whole step bend, I have to be sure that I'm spot on. So normally in a phrase, you'll hear a combination of blue notes combined with the next note up in pitch, and then actual whole step bend. What we're going for now is to get that whole step bend accurate and consistent so that you can count on it. Now, when we there's one other bend I want to mention before we get down to application here, and that's bending also from the third degree of the scale. There it is on the first string. Bending that same note on the third string. Now there I have to shift out of position. I'm using my third finger to play A, the root, or the tonic. And then I use my first and second fingers together. I don't want to bend the whole step with one finger. It's not going to work very well. So I use two fingers there. And the third string is a little easier to bend than the others. And I used a little vibrato there, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, in terms of application, it's very common to combine bends with pull-offs, and I just did that, actually, in the context of those phrases. So I bended a whole step, release the bend, just let it come back to the original pitch, and then pull off with the finger. Doing the same thing on the second string. First string. Now, when I'm bending on the first and second strings, I'm reaching up that extra fret to have the strength. And then I have to reach back down, it's a stretch, to my index finger to do the pull-off. That takes some practice. But the idea there is that you're creating a legato phrase. The notes flow from one to the other. There's no break in the melody. All right, so we got the basic techniques. Now let's put them to work, and we'll do a little call and response here using bends like we did with the blue notes. And I'll play a phrase that includes a bend, and you play the phrase back at me, and you can listen to this thing over and over again and kind of capture the details of it. So we're playing in tempo now, in the key of A, over this shuffle rhythm track, and that's going to prepare us to go to the next step, which is to use bends over the 12 bar. Okay, here we go. One chord shuffle. Okay, a little smorgasbord of string bends there. Now, one technique I'm using quite a bit is the string bend, and you bend to the same pitch as the fretted note on the adjacent string. In other words, I bend from the 4th to the 5th, and then play the same note on the 2nd string. So, and then often combine that. T-Bone Walker, who was the guy that really wrote the book on electric guitar blues back in the 40s, would use a lick like this. That was kind of his trademark. Chuck Berry stole that one and used it as one of his key licks as well. Now there, the only difference is that you bend the note and then you mute it by bringing your thumb back down. You pick the note and then bring the thumb back down to mute that same string. So it makes it a little bit more rhythmic. We'll take a little bit of a look at T-Bone's style later on in the context of jump blues and examine that technique more. But that's sort of a basic picking technique, the adjacent string. All right, so the next thing to do is to put this to work in the context of a 12 bar, and for that purpose, I've got a track queued up here in the key of G. Now, why the heck are we changing keys? Well, you want to get comfortable in all keys, and certainly G is it's a very common key. Of course, everybody's going to wind up playing blues in that key at some point. The techniques are the same. And by moving them down 2 frets, you do all the same stuff. I want to get you out of the habit of always thinking in A. We tend to do that as guitar players. That's our home key. But we're going to do the same techniques I just showed you, same bends and all that, in the context of a 12-bar blues in G. Let's give it a shot. Yeah. Now, I used pretty much the same exact techniques we went over earlier. You've got, there's the bend to the adjacent string, the pull off, right? Now that one, the trick there is it's the stretch. Stretch, and then roll the finger over. Reach way up for that bend. Now there I bend the third string and reach up to the first string. Right, you get the idea. They're all kind of variations on a theme. Whole step bends, the blue note bends, and by the way, there's no law that says you can't combine bends with slides. Right? As you develop a style, each of these techniques kind of takes a place in your vocabulary. Some players prefer to slide rather than bend. In fact, there's a school of players that are the real old school blues guitar guys. They listen to, they dress like they're in the 40s, baggy suits and all that. Refuse to bend a string. Dang it, they didn't do that back in the day. Then there are other players who are so-called string stretchers, who'll bend that string as far as it'll go. They're kind of different schools of blues guitar playing, and they're all great, if they're done well. And so your choice is, how much do you like to incorporate that thing? Don't think of it as a technique, think of it as an expression and a way of expressing the note. Okay, so now you've got some stuff to chew on there, working on those whole step bends, integrating them into the pattern and into the 12 bars. So go ahead and work on that and come back and we'll talk some more.